welcome to the D3D4 Football Podcast with me, your host, James Richards. Right, yes, hello everyone. It's another D3D4 Football Podcast. You'd assume, being summer, that there'd be a nice lull in the action and we could all take a bit of a rest, but this is League 1 and 2 and this is the new modern football where basically there's a crisis every other day. So we are back to talk about the campaign that is still running on in legal offices right across the country. You've got Macclesfield, who finally were relegated, as most of us expected, via a yet another points deduction. We have Charlton in a very dire situation. Looks like they could be on the brink, and lots of comparisons coming out with them and Bury. So we hope those aren't going to be true, but we have to keep an eye on that unfolding situation. It's not very good. Wigan still in trouble, of course. But we will be talking about the salary cap as well, another controversial move made that's left some of the bigger clubs in the lower leagues feeling very disgruntled. And we will give a bit of a light-hearted opinion on some of the transfers that have already taken place. I'm joined by Ed Walker, Chris Stringer as always, and we've got a Macclesfield fan joining us today. Ellie Thomason, welcome to the podcast. How do we find you?
All good, thank you. How are you all?
Yeah, we're all good. Our club haven't been relegated.
Well, aside from that.
Jesus Christ.
The elephant in the room.
Yeah, well, it does seem very contrived what's happened, and we may as well jump straight into it, really, because we've been waiting for this bit of information for goodness knows how long. We knew that there was always a chance that Macclesfield would get a further points deduction, but it seemed to be when it went to the independent panel and they added the further 2 points that were suspended from before, that would be that. Because let's be honest, and not unfair to Stevenage, they were abysmal last season on the pitch. They won 3 games all season, and yet they will be the team remaining in the division for another year after Macclesfield had their initial decision appealed by the EFL. It went back to another independent panel or arbitration panel, and they deducted a further 4 points. So, Ellie, that means your team essentially have had 17 points deducted from them across the campaign.
Yeah, and then the way that the points per game worked out, I think it works out at something like 21.1 points deducted, which is absolutely bonkers. There's no one is denying that we needed to be punished. We absolutely did. The club has been run terribly for a number of years now. But it just, you get 12 points taken off for going into administration. And we've had 17 points deducted. Obviously, if you weren't paid and I wasn't paid, you'd want some sort of punishment. But it just seems 17 points deducted just seems an absolutely incredible amount.
What it seems like from the outside, and we were discussing this on previous podcasts, is that the EFL essentially don't want Macclesfield to be their problem anymore. So rather than just kick them out on, grounds of the club not being run properly, not paying players, they contrive to get enough points removed to make them finish bottom and get them relegated in that way.
Yeah, and I can't blame them for not wanting us to be their problem. Like, our owner is disastrous and he must be an absolute nightmare for them. He's, just from what they say, he lies to them and he makes things up and he deceives them, and he is not fit to be a football owner, clearly, the owner of a football club. It's not just this season that there's been problems. It's been going on way back, even when we were in non-league. The year we got promoted, there was a massive dip in form around Christmas when the players stopped getting paid that season, and then it carried on into the first season in the Football League. We nearly didn't play our last game of the season that saw us survive because players hadn't been paid and they were sick of it. And then it just goes on and on and on, and you can see why I wouldn't want to deal with him. But then it's the old thing, it shouldn't be, football outcomes should be decided by what goes on the pitch. It's just a sad state of affairs that all the hard work on the pitch has been ruined by shambles off it.
Yeah, indeed, because the performances on the pitch are actually pretty good. You'd have finished safely in mid-table with a tiny budget and, a team made up of young players on loan and some misfits from clubs further up the league, and actually were playing really well under Daryl McMahon. Your owner, give us a bit of background about him then, because what do we actually know about him? Amal Al-Qadi, he bought the club. Has he, I've heard reports that he's never been there, he's never really done anything with it. Why did he buy a club if he's not got the funding or got the interest?
So he is from Iraq, and I think he married a woman from Macclesfield, which is how he got the connection. He's based in London, splits his time between there and Ibiza, I think. When I've been to kind of away games in London, I've seen him there, but he doesn't come to too many home games anymore. I think he kind of knows he's not welcome, which is, it's his own club, but he knows he's not wanted. And yeah, it just seems like he doesn't have a lot of money. From what I've gathered about his own company, it's a failing telecoms communications company in Iraq. I don't know a huge deal about him, but to be honest, like, he came in 20 odd years ago, obviously oversaw promotion. Don't think a lot of that was down to him. Even the year we got promoted, we had a tiny budget, and that was kind of against all odds as such. But yeah, he's not been popular for a long time, but especially in the last 3 or 4 years, it's become really sour.
Yeah, because we had Elliot Jarrell join us to talk about the situation as a player, from a player's perspective, and he made it quite clear how difficult it was and how badly some of the players were treated, in fact. But what's the future hold? Because of course there is concern that this relegation, and the club that your club are saying that they've got many applicants for the new manager, new chairman, etc. But you've got no players. You don't know if the league you're dropping into is going to start anytime soon, and indeed, will the National League even accept a club that can't provide proof that you're going to be able to fulfil fixtures if that league does start?
Yeah, the future is hugely uncertain. That's the main worry, is that we might never get to see them play again. All the fans are saying, I know that we've not got the biggest fan base, and they've said it before, but they are all adamant, the majority, they are not going back if he is still the owner. And with the drop into the National League, the financial differences from the Football League is huge anyway. And then if the small fan base we do have don't bother turning up either, it's just, at the minute, you can only see it going one way, unless he sells up and you get, another buyer who can turn it around, because it really just looks grim at the minute.
Is there any buyers on the horizon? Because there was all this talk about Les Seeley's son, wasn't there, a while ago?
Yeah, so there was him, and there was supposedly another couple, but that was when we were a Football League club. I don't know how attractive it is to buy them now they're in the National League, but who's going to want to buy a club with got no players? We've got one player, left at the minute, Fiacre Kelleher, but I can't see him being there next season. No manager, no potential league to go into. Who would want to buy that? Yeah,
indeed. Not good times, and another serious indictment of the way that football has gone in recent years and the way that the EFL conduct their business. I don't think anyone, and I'll get your take on this, Chris, because I don't think anyone would have argued that Macclesfield should have been punished, because they didn't fulfil fixtures. It was ruining the integrity of the League 2 competition. Could have seriously, of course, affected the teams that they were playing as promotion bids. But do you think that the points deduction has been proportionate to the crimes, essentially, here?
It's a really difficult one. I think the thing with Macclesfield is that, they've not paid players on several times, but how many clubs have we talked about in League 1 and 2 that haven't paid players on time? And it does feel... I think the 12-point deduction you can't argue with, and then possibly because of the extent of failures to pay salaries and other financial issues, there was an argument for an additional point deduction. But it does feel like Macclesfield have been hit harder than other clubs, frankly, because it is such a mess, and as you alluded to before, the EFL don't really want to bother with them at the moment.
No, indeed. I mean, if they're a bigger club that, say, just for example, I'll just pull something out of thin air here. Nothing, of course, that's anything based on reality. But say a big club sold their own stadium to themselves a couple of years ago and have benefited financially from doing it. Maybe the EFL would give them a 12-point deduction, but not do it this season or the last season when they benefited, but move it to the season after. I mean, that would be daft, wouldn't it? I mean,
it sounds unrealistic.
Yeah, sorry, just being silly. Can't see that happening. But it does seem, doesn't it, that smaller clubs are treated differently because they're less.
We saw it with Bury. Saw it with Bury the same, because when you look at the two situations we were talking about last season, Bury and Bolton, there were so many similarities, and yet Bury were kicked out of the league and Bolton were kept in. And it does just feel that the EFL now needs to get something in their constitution that says that there is a fixed point deduction for certain financial issues. There's been discussions that there should be an automatic point deduction for failing to pay player wages. Fine, do that, make sure it's a fixed penalty. So you don't get this situation where Macclesfield, there's a couple of points deducted here and a couple of points deducted there.
Yeah, because then at least if it's in black and white, it's in a charter which is agreed by all the owners of all the clubs, essentially all the members of the EFL. You can't really argue against it,
Yeah.
But it doesn't feel good right now for football. For Stevenage, they've been let off the hook big time after an appalling campaign. I won't criticise their club, though. I think as a club, you can't argue. We've talked about this before. Great community club, have paid their players on time, but in the last season, really, they got everything on the pitch completely wrong. Just couldn't score a goal for love nor money. But indeed, they'll be staying in the EFL, and they've already started building a team which, interestingly, is full of players from a non-league background that they've signed. They've got a couple more to come, I'm sure, and I think they'll have a far better campaign on the pitch than they did last year. But still, fortunate indeed. Right. It's not just, though, is it, Macclesfield that are in trouble? At the moment, there's a big campaign which we've been trying to push ourselves a little bit on social media. SaveCAFC, Charlton Athletic in big trouble as well. Ed, this one's a bit of a mess, isn't it? I mean, I don't know what you know about it, but as far as I can gather, obviously Roland de Châtelet was not a popular man. He was paying the wages of players. It was never a case of that, but he just didn't run the club very well, lost fan support, and in the end sold it to a company called E Street Investments, which was made up of a guy called Matt Southall and Tahu Nima, who were jointly coming in to sort of run the club. It looked like a bright new era, actually, to be fair, to get going, but there was a big fallout between the pair very early on, and I won't go into the details of that because it was a bit tit for tat across Twitter and across Instagram, whatever, but it didn't end well, and it looked like they were going to then pull out of the club. I mean, they had Matt South, I think, was escorted out of the club by police at one stage.
Yeah.
So it wasn't very good. Then Chris Farnell, this lawyer who had been involved in the Bury situation, he was trying to get a Brazilian priest, I think, to buy Bury. He came in trying to sell the club to a chap called Paul Elliott. I'm pretty sure it was Paul Elliott. And when the fans did some digging on him, it looked like he'd basically been in charge of a load of businesses that had gone bankrupt and didn't have that financial clout to do it. Chris Farnell then was visited, is the best way to say it, by some Charlton fans in his office, and that went round on social media. He's now been removed as the lawyer of the club by Tahu Nima, and Nima has also refused now to sell the club to Paul Elliott. But they do not have very long to sort this situation out because they need a buyer. They need someone who is going to take on whatever financial burdens the club has. And it's all very messy and complicated. I mean, Ed, do you know any more about this? What are your take on a big club like Charlton potentially doing a Bury?
It's just a circus, isn't it? That's the best way you could describe it, really, behind the scenes at that club. I've got to be honest, I find it incredibly confusing, everything going on there, because you've explained it quite well there, but even then it's still...
Did I? I don't think so.
Well, it takes a bit of time. You've got to take it all in, otherwise you lose track of where you're going, but it's all just a mess, and it's so sad to see to what is a really big club. They have history far and much higher up the football pyramid than this, and I really hope this doesn't happen again. I really don't want to see us lose another football club like this.
Barclay and Varna are the two that are trying to potentially buy the club, but obviously de Châtelet still owns the stadium and training ground, of which Nima had said he would purchase off him, committed to buy it off him within 5 years for 50 million. So anyone who takes over is going to have to renegotiate those terms with de Châtelet, because of course, buying a club that doesn't own their assets is never going to be that attractive a prospect for anyone. So that's another complication in this. Really don't know what's going to happen. But the truth is, whatever it is that's going on in the background, the EFL have made a clear statement, didn't they, saying that this could be another Bury. They were saying that, the consequences, we have made Charlton very aware of the consequences if they can't prove that they can finish next season. Of course, next season starts in, was it 4 weeks?
It's a month.
Yeah, a month. So we've got a month for them to essentially find a buyer. Wigan in the same situation. Their administrators made a similar comment about it. It's a whole lot of mess, isn't it, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I've done some reading on Charlton this week, and it reeks of Bury, but I sort of got my head around Bury, and I'm still struggling to get around how this has happened to Charlton. And it is just that mess in ESI, where they've fallen out. And now you've got the same situation with Bury, where someone's popping up over there saying, I'll buy Charlton, I'll save Charlton, and it's just a difficult one. And the big thing the EFL's got to contend with now, which they didn't have with Bury, is that Charlton are a very, very big club. And that's no disrespect to Bury one bit. But Charlton, it's not long since we were talking about Charlton as a Premier League club. It's sort of in the last couple of decades.
Their fans are very good at organising themselves in tough situations. They've done it on several occasions in history. So they will be formulating plans for sure to try and work out how best to tackle this. I mean, the big worry, I suppose, is the timeframes involved. And the fact that EFL, there were bidders, and I know the EFL failed them all on the owners and directors test, which is, as we know.
Again.
Yeah, but how hard is it to fail that test? Because we've seen some of the owners that come through it. You think, how on earth did this chap pass that test?
At least he took the test with this one.
Yeah. It's a depressing situation. All I would ask all fans is, we are all fans of clubs in the lower league, and as much as we have this bit of banter between clubs, partisan rivalries, etc., I think in times like this we all need to unite behind a club in crisis, because it could be our own. And the way things are going, this is going to become a far more frequent thing that we have to deal with. And I think also all lower league fans need to try and formulate some ideas as groups as to what we want to see in terms of EFL reform and how we want our game run, because it's our clubs that are suffering.
But how do you change this? I mean, the EFL, there's so many clubs in this situation now.
Well, you need to have someone who's independently skilled to run the EFL owners and directors test, and also to oversee purchases. The EFL don't have the ability or indeed the expertise to say this is a company or these are an individual who are suitable owners for an EFL member club. They just don't have that expertise. They and it's the Wigan situation proves it. They approved the sale just before, which looks suspicious before it was even done, doesn't it? I mean, who would buy a club for a huge profit in the middle of the biggest financial downturn probably in history? It's ridiculous.
And the thing with the Wigan situation that really highlights it is that, at least from what I've read about this, the EFL did everything by the book with Wigan. They made them take the fit and proper owners test. They checked their finances, and it's still gone horrendously wrong.
Yeah, finances based in the Cayman Islands. That's never a warning flag, is it? Yeah, I don't know. That's why I think you need. I mean, there must be the money in the game to have the EFL running the sort of the laws of the game and the disciplinary side. But as for the owners and directors test, and as for the sale of clubs, get some experts involved. You wouldn't need massive teams because, there's not many clubs being sold at any one time. You've got one or two probably at most in the EFL. So, get those experts in place. Ellie, I was going to ask you your opinion as well on, Damien Collins, MP. We had him on here talking about his plan that if a club goes into financial distress, essentially the government would purchase and put in a member of their government on the board to make sure that club doesn't go under. Is that something you think, with Macclesfield being in the precarious situation now, that you'd like to see in the future?
I think speaking as a Mac, I think we'd take any help we can get from anybody, to be honest. But then should it fall on the government to have to do that? But yeah, I guess it would be good to see local MPs kind of support. Our local MP doesn't have a huge input in the. He pipes up every now and again when there's a bit of trouble, but you kind of need the support all year round, every season, don't you? So yeah, I think that's something that. But then, if a huge number of clubs go under, it could be a huge financial burden for them. They've got enough on at the minute, haven't they?
Indeed, it could be. It could be. I mean, the idea was rather than give clubs a loan, that you take equity in the club as security, and then when things are better, potentially sell it back to a fan trust or something. I mean, it has flaws, to be honest, but there's not been anything I've seen suggested that gives me any more reassurance that it's going to do any better. Don't know, but I mean, indeed, we're going to have to move on. We've got a big discussion point coming up here, guys. The salary cap. And it went down. It went down really well, didn't it?
Like a lead balloon.
Yeah, it was quite funny. The reactions of the fans at Ipswich, Sunderland, Portsmouth, et al. I mean, it was not unsurprising, to be honest. If you're a club with a lot of money coming in due to the fact that you're a bigger club, you've got more fans. Is it right to cap them? Anyway, let me just give you the overview. So basically, clubs in League 1 and 2 will be capped at 2.5 million in League 1 of what you can spend on wages, and in League 2 it's 1.5 million. However, this does include image rights, agent fees, bonuses, etc. So it is quite encompassing to stop clubs getting around it. It does not include transfer fees or bonuses for squad goals such as promotion, winning the FA Cup or getting to a certain round of the FA Cup. So you could laden up those bonuses to pay players a bit more. And one thing I will say as well, the salary cap is 2.5 million in League 1. So take that as an example. You can still pay a player anything you like. It's a squad cap. So as long as your squad's overall wages do not go above 2.5 million, you could essentially, if you wanted to, pay one player 2.5 million and ask everyone else to pay for free. But obviously, no, not realistic. But that's the example. So it's not saying that you have to pay each player an even split of £2.5 million across the year. It's saying that your squad cap has to be no more than that overall. And in American sports they have the same system where star players are paid accordingly and squad players are paid a lot less. The other thing is, if you are already under contract and being paid a lot of money, your salary will only be capped at the divisional average, which I think they're talking about being about £2,500 a week in League 1. So not a huge amount, and it would mean that clubs have a little bit of time to get their wage bills down. But Ed, I'll come to you to start with on this. I'm sure you'll love that. Sunderland's wage bill last season, 21 million. They've got to get it down to 2.5 million. Obviously, it depends how long a contracts their current players have signed, but they may have a bit of time to do it. But it does seem, when you take into account those figures, highly unlikely that they'll be able to do it easily.
It just makes you think, isn't it? If they keep this long term, any club that goes down from the Championship is going to have quite a task on their hands to sort it out. I get why it's been put in. I think it's pretty clear. It's particularly in the current climate, it's worth protecting clubs as best as we can, and this is one way to do it. I don't think long term it's going to be beneficial because you'll just see the gap between the second and the third tier get even bigger than what it is now, I think. But in the short term, I do get why it's there, but I definitely understand the discomfort that particularly the bigger, more wealthier League One clubs have towards it.
Under 21 players are not included in it. Do you think we'll see a lot more emphasis on youth? A lot of clubs are actually recruiting younger than they have before.
Well, that's for the clubs. Not all the clubs have established academies, do they? You do have people like Sunderland are well known, obviously, for producing their players. Same with clubs like Portsmouth as well. But other clubs don't necessarily make great use of their youth system and haven't got that established one in place, so they can't benefit as much from that at the minute.
Is it right, though, that clubs at the different end of the financial spectrum, so Accrington and Sunderland, is it right that they are only allowed to spend a maximum of £2.5 million on wages?
No, I wouldn't say so. I don't think there was I saw some people saying it should be based on revenue.
It already is.
Is it based on revenue already?
Well, that's what it is prior to this cap, isn't it?
But more based on club revenue rather than...
That's their logic with the current. Because people have been making this argument and it's been sort of doing my head in because that's the current logic behind the financial fair play rules, which, as we know, clubs find a way around.
Yeah.
Well, that's the problem. If it's based on revenue, you can just inflate your revenue by selling your ground to yourself, as one example. But I mean, that's what they do, isn't it? I mean, that's my only problem with the current rules as they stand. If you have, and directors and owners' loans, like Fleetwood, I think the owner Andrew Pearley has put in something like 17 million quid of his own money to take the club where they're going. But I mean, they've only got turnover about 6 million. I mean, it's crazy. And the problem is, you could see clubs, if owners decide to suddenly pull out, or their core businesses struggle, you could suddenly see them, a club with huge financial burdens on their contracts of the players that are under contract, which they just can't meet without the help of a rich individual. And that's the danger. That's what we have seen essentially at Bury. So I do agree in those terms of the salary cap, and I think there are ways around it. You could, for example, have rules where any money you want to spend over the cap has to be in a protected ring-fenced account, so it's there and it has to be proven to be there before you let them spend it. So the EFL financial body has to see that money, and then they'll say, well, the money's there, so yes, you can spend it, because it's not, even if the owner decides to pull out, that money is already put somewhere earmarked for the cost that they've incurred or that they're going to incur. That would be a way around it. But yeah, I think it doesn't sit right. I think to have Sunderland and Ipswich and clubs curtailed by what they can spend, it doesn't sit easy with me, but I get why it's doing it. We need some sort of change to the way football is going, and I think a salary cap will be beneficial. But I get the argument. I get the argument for both sides of it. And, my team, Oxford, we voted against the salary cap. However, we're in a good position that we will make it beneficial to us either way, because I think our wages last season were 3 million. Obviously, with the sort of rules, the transitional rules will be underneath the cap, because it'll bring some of our wages down to the divisional average, so that's fine. And it will also mean that we're being pulled closer to our competition, so it could benefit us as well. So it's a difficult one. Ellie, what's your take on the salary cap, being the fan of a club that obviously is at the financially lower end of the spectrum and has continued to struggle? Was it desperately needed?
Yeah, I'm a bit like you. I can see both sides of the argument, to be honest. I think in one way it's a bit, when people say, oh, we'll find out who the best Formula One driver is if we put everyone in the same car. It's it might make the league a bit more competitive. That could be an only positive if they're all kind of spending the same amount, but it just, kind of good for smaller clubs like us, but then I feel a bit for big clubs. But as you say, I think it was needed the way it was heading.
Well, one EFL chairman said to me privately that he acknowledges that it prejudices the big clubs, but it's a benefit to the overwhelming majority. And at a time like this, that's surely what we've all got to be looking at, and it'll be good for the league in general. I think what I'd like to see is, once things have settled down, and I think it's important we have the salary cap in place as it stands right now, but once things have settled down, this is reviewable, Chris, isn't it? It's not something that is set in stone. I think, am I right in saying they have to vote on this every year?
I think you're right. I'm not positive, but I think it will be reviewed. I don't think this is set in stone now. My big issue with it is not the salary cap per se, which I think probably does provide a little bit of a level playing field and does protect some clubs. I think my big issue is that the Championship isn't also involved in this decision.
Oh no, they're having their own discussion, Chris, because of course they're going to limit their own spending. Yeah.
Well, great, but what's the point in that? Because as was pointed out before, Sunderland and Portsmouth, for example, are two clubs that financially can compete with bottom half Championship clubs for players. And now that's essentially been eradicated, because at the moment the Championship is still without a cap. So they can in the time between League 1 and 2 having their discussion and the Championship having their discussion, they can continue to sign players on big wages who will then come out in this divisional average. Presumably they'll continue with that sort of model in the Championship. And at the other end of the spectrum, I appreciate this isn't the EFL's fault. They can't tell the National League what to do. But at the other end of the spectrum, bottom half League 2 clubs can now potentially be outspent by top half National League teams. And
yeah,
that's the disparity that doesn't sit well with me. But particularly, as Ed said before, I think it's because it's not been a total integrated EFL decision. You've got this huge gap between League One and the Championship now.
Yeah, there was discussions of what would be a good cap for the Championship. Some owners were reportedly saying 20 million, but then a lot of others were saying that's nowhere near enough. I mean, Bournemouth, who are now dropping into the Championship, their wage bill was over 100 million last year.
And herein you have the big problem with the Premier League. This is the Premier League being an entirely separate body from the EFL, essentially, means that it's difficult to get all four leagues together for a discussion on this. I find it bonkers. I find, as with a lot of things in this country at the moment, COVID has just highlighted how many flaws there are in so many systems.
I agree completely, and I think it's leaning towards, if you're looking at it right now, if you're one of those guys who thinks that they're just going to bring a Championship will essentially become Premier League 2, it's looking more and more likely, isn't it? I mean, it's looking more and more likely that clubs at that level, they're not going to want to limit their spending if their owners are going to be willing to throw money at it, and the rewards of getting into the Premier League. I mean, I'm old enough to remember Bournemouth. Bournemouth were always just this League 1 and 2 mainstay.
Yeah.
They were always a club that you'd play. If you're playing Bournemouth, you knew you were in the lower leagues. It was as simple as that. And the fact that they're now coming down after spending over 100 million on wages, it just mind boggles, really.
And that's a small wage bill in the Premier League.
Yeah, it is. I mean, not many clubs are running in a particularly sustainable. Well, I suppose they're sustainable because of the huge money they get from the TV deal. But in terms of as soon as they drop down, they're in big trouble. And the parachute payment system only makes things worse, really, for clubs in our level.
And the Championship's already, you mentioned them being Premier League 2, but actually, in the very fact that for this and for curtailing the end of the season, the Championship's been treated entirely differently to League 1 and 2. It's always been, this is a League 1 and 2 decision, this is a Championship decision. You either have to have it where each of the leagues votes independently and has decisions made independently for each of them, or you have it in this joint discussion. I don't get why they're separating it out like this.
Well, because let's be honest, the Championship clubs have the EFL over a barrel. Because with regards they do, because with regards to the TV deal, people aren't paying money. Sky aren't paying money so that they can watch, I don't know, Mansfield take on Grimsby in League 2. They're paying the money so they could see teams like Leeds last season take on West Brom, and that's what the EFL know, and they don't want to damage their chances commercially. I think by pissing off all the clubs in the Championship. It's a very difficult situation. But like we've said on many podcasts, it is a rather depressing one because it highlights the difficulties football is going through at the moment. But I really don't know what we do. I mean, the salary cap for me is good in the short term. It needs to be done. I think there could be flexibilities introduced to help the bigger clubs spend, something more akin to what they can afford through their revenues.
Yeah.
But for now, they're going to have to do their best, and it won't really affect them so much this season. It's when they have to re-sign players to new contracts or sign new players when these current group are out of contract that we'll see how it goes. But part of me sort of skeptically thinking it won't last that long. We'll have to wait and see. Right, final points: transfers. There's loads of business going on at the moment in football. We talk at the top level of huge deals worth over 40 to 50 million. Well, that doesn't happen down at our level, but there is still some eye-catching moves taking place. I asked you guys to pick a couple. You wouldn't believe it, listeners, but I asked these guys to pick a couple of players that they wanted to talk about. And Ed and Chris, without communicating at all, picked exactly the same pair. So Chris has very kindly decided to talk about two different players. But let's go to you, Ed. Who are the two players that caught yours and apparently Chris's eye as well?
I'm just going to say this bodes well for when we're doing the league predictions, doesn't it? Chris and I are going to have the exact same tables when we come to that.
Well, that'd make it less complicated. That'd be good.
That's another time. Do you want my League 1 ones or League 2 first?
Let's go League 1 first.
Okay, I've gone with a guy who has moved up a division. I've gone with clubs who probably don't get as much coverage because they don't tend to finish that high up. But I think this year you're going to want to watch this guy. And it's Ollie Palmer, who has just made a move from Crawley Town to AFC Wimbledon. Palmer
do you see his video? I'm the new number 9.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Palmer has had 2 excellent seasons at Crawley. He's been utilised really well, particularly last year when he played in the front 2 alongside Ashley Nadazan. And Joe Pigott, I think, could be just as similar to Nadazan for Wimbledon. So using those 2 as a front 2 together, you might not see them set the league alight, certainly. But when you consider what Wimbledon are and how well we think they do in this division to be competing with other teams in it, that is a great front line to have, I think, next season. Pigott and Ollie Palmer. So that'll be worth watching next season, certainly.
Yeah, and he's actually, I watched him loads last season, and he's actually much better with his feet than people give him credit for.
He's 6'5". People look at his size and think, there you go, he's a target man. You just use him as a focal point. No, you get the ball with his feet. He's very good, composed with it. Excellent little dribbler as well.
Yeah, holds the ball up.
What Ollie Palmer is, it annoys me every time I see him play because he looks crap and then he'll score 3 against you.
Yeah, he falls over a lot for a big guy as well, doesn't he?
He does, yeah. But he always scores.
Yeah, no, that's a good bit of business. They've also got Alex Woodyard as well at Wimbledon, which I think is a nifty buy.
Yeah, Wimbledon will be interesting to watch this year. And then my League 2 one, again, is another club down there. And it's one that you would probably say in a similar situation isn't really at the financial same power as the other teams in the division. And it's Morecambe. And it's a guy who was there last year, Adam Phillips, who came in from Burnley on loan in January, got 7 goal involvements in 11 games, and if he carries that on this season, he's going to have 25 plus goal involvements. Like, the impact he made last year was severely underrated because it was Morecambe, not Swindon, Crewe, Plymouth, Cheltenham, that lot. His impact was phenomenal. If he carries that into this season, he is going to be one of the best players in the division.
They've done really well to get him back there, haven't they? I was so surprised when I saw that they'd announced his return. Yeah,
him and Cunha both come back as well, which is really good to see.
Yeah, no, nifty bit of business, and I look forward to seeing how he does. Right, Mansfield fans, listen up. Corey O'Keefe, for me, was the one. I said this on Twitter. I think he's actually the best bit of business you've done. Ellie, you're going to give us your take on this because he was at Macclesfield last season. And let's be honest, it wasn't a great Macclesfield side, yet he was probably, I'd argue, your best player. Is that fair?
Definitely one of. Yes, we had him on loan from Birmingham. He's a cracking player. Got a really good throw on him as well, which is always love to see, a good long throw. Gets forward, plenty of crosses in, really pacey, and he's still pretty young as well. I think he's early 20, 21, 22,
22, I think he is, yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a really good sign, and he's definitely, you'd argue a lot of our players weren't League 2 standard, but he definitely is, and probably could have gone up a league as well, but yeah, I think he'll do well there.
I think he will. I mean, his dribbling stats were insane. At one point, he had completed more successful dribbles per 90 minutes than any player in the division, and this is a division with some technical players in, like Danny Mayer, etc. So he was really good. Excellent, energy, gets forward, can play multiple positions as well. He was often used on the right and the left. His
versatility is absolutely ridiculous.
And they've got him on a permanent.
Exactly. Like, you can put him anywhere, a defensive outfield position, and he'll do what you want to him. It's just this player any club would want to have.
I think you look at all the signings they've made, and they've done some decent business. Mansfield.
I would say Theron Rawson. Probably is my pick from that, alongside Corey O'Keefe. I think he was really good at Forest Green last year, and he'll be a really good centre half for Mansfield.
I just feel that I do agree Rawson's a good centre back, but I would be surprised to see him be able to go beyond maybe even League One level. I don't see him as having that growth. I may be proved wrong, but Corey O'Keefe is a player I think that has a lot more potential. I think getting him on a permanent, it's a real asset, especially when you've seen CJ Hamilton go for potentially a sizable fee as well.
Definitely.
Let's go to you, Chris, for your 2 that you've quickly scrambled to find.
Well, I had picked a couple of backup ones in case anyone else had picked my 2. I didn't expect both of them to have gone.
Sorry.
I went for in League One Christopher Missilou, which might be a little bit controversial with Oldham fans.
They're throwing their iPods or whatever they're listening to this on in their iPhones down the toilet right now.
iPod showing your age there, James.
Yeah, don't.
I think he's a really good signing. I expect Northampton will be in the bottom half of League One next season, and as I know far too well, the bottom half of League One is a scrappy part of the league, and I think Christopher Missalou is a fantastic addition to any club in that sort of position. He breaks up play really, really well, but he's also got a good pass about him. He can actually start a lot of attacks. One of his finest performances against Fulham in the FA Cup last season. I think he'll do a really good job for Northampton.
Good pickup.
In League Two, I went for Owen Doyle for Bolton. I just think that's a really smart bit of business. I was actually surprised that he didn't stick around with Swindon, but I imagine he's probably based in the north, having played for Preston, Oldham and Bradford. So I imagine it was.
And also he was offered a 3-year deal.
Yes, that'll be. I mean, that is the risky part of this deal for me. I think it's a long-term deal for someone who is, what's he, 30 now?
32.
32, yeah.
Yeah. So that's the risky side of this. But we saw last season how good he was for Swindon. He didn't particularly do it at Bradford, but he did do it for Oldham the season before that. So I think that's a fantastic deal. The word of caution I would give is that you've got to build your team properly around him. You can't just lump the ball up to him and hope he'll score. You've got to properly play that Wellens ball football.
Yeah, basically Wellens said, I don't want him to run around at all. He just needs to stay in the box, and it's my creative players' job to find him.
Yes, exactly.
Bolton have got the players that can do that, though. Sarcevic, Politic, they've got people who can do that.
And they've got a manager who plays the right way.
Exactly. They've got the ingredients for it.
Ian Evatt's team. They beat someone 7-0, was it, in pre-season? And he was like, it should have been 11. High standards he is pushing. I'm looking forward to seeing how they do. Ellie, I'll get your take as well on another transfer. Fraser Horsfall, really good centre-back. Ex-Kidderminster, am I right in saying? Who you had last year. He's gone to Northampton.
Yeah. I was quite surprised by that. I'm not sure he's League One standard. But again, that might be if he plays alongside better players, they might get best out of him. He's one of those players you don't really notice, but that might be because he doesn't really make a lot of mistakes. But then he did seem to make quite a few mistakes, and then you don't notice him, kind of thing. But fair play to him, it's a good move up for him.
I hope it does well. I thought for where he signed from, that he did pretty well in a team that was often under the cosh, so we'll have to wait and see. I mean, I think his style will fit well with how Keith Curle plays. That's what I will say. Uncompromising is how I call him. He's a no nonsense defender. Connor Kirby, Harrogate have signed him. Now he was excellent last season for you guys, wasn't he?
Yeah, I think he was my player of the season. He's brilliant. He's like a little terrier on the pitch. He's when you just always get stuck in. He always gives 100. I think every away game I've been to, and they say on the coach on the way back, fill in your slip for player of the match. I think I put him every time. I was gutted in a way, just because I kind of had this false hope he might stick around, but that was ridiculous. But yeah, really pleased for him, and I think he could definitely go higher up.
Yeah, I certainly think he will, and I think Harrogate have done really well to get him. Personally, I was quite surprised to see that one, but they've done exceptionally well, and we won't go through every transfer. There has been so many, but just our insight into a couple there. Of course, the next podcasts you will hear from us as a group will be our League 1 and 2 prediction podcast, looking at where we think each team will finish in 2020-21. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see if we can how we will decipher this, because of course the other thing about this season is the transfer window, I think, doesn't shut. Is it right, guys, until October?
I think so, yeah.
I don't even know anymore.
Yeah, it essentially means that a lot of business might be done well after the season has started. So, but we'll do our best based on the squads at the time to give our insight into where we think and how we think teams will do. Ellie, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, more than welcome. And Chris, thank you for giving us your insight as always.
Yeah, always a pleasure.
And Ed, I'm looking forward to seeing you and Chris in tandem with your League 1 and 2 predictions.
No doubt, no doubt.
Telekinesis between you two, it's worrying. Anyway, thank you for listening to this. Please give it a share, and if you can become a patron to support what we're doing, help us continue producing podcasts throughout the new campaign, please do so. You can actually pay in your own currency now, so it can be done in pounds if paying in dollars is something that puts you off. But we're only looking for, I think it's about 80p a month to just give us that little bit of help to keep producing all of this stuff that we do. But anyway, we'll see you next week. Thanks, guys. Take care.